Remove inner snap ring. Remove outer snap ring on turbine side by using snap ring pliers. Remove floating journal bearing on turbine side and check its surfaces. Mark an identification mark on the bearing. Remove inner snap ring. Prepare tools. Wear protective gears. The parts which are soaked in cleaning agent are as below. As only turbine impeller of turbine shaft must be soaked in the cleaning agent, cover the shaft part with protective tape. Prepare a stand so as not to soak the shaft part in the cleaning agent. Prepare a cleaning bath. Put turbine housing and heat shield in the bath. Put turbine shaft into the bath. Be sure not to soak the shaft part. Take some time to soak carbon deposit with the agent. When the agent penetrates into carbon deposit, remove the deposit. Use a brush to remove the deposit. Be sure not to splash the cleaning agent to the shaft part. Remove the deposit on heat shield with a brush. Remove the deposit on turbine housing with the wire brush. After removing deposit, wash the agent off and blow air. Cover mount part of heat shield with soaked cloth and take time out to penetrate the agent into deposit. When the agent penetrates carbon deposit, remove the deposit. The parts which are washed by flashing oil are as below. Brush surfaces with a hard brush, but do not use a wire brush. After cleaning, distinguish the parts, not to mix up. And then blow air. Fix bearing housing with the vise. Blow air into the housing. When assembling snap rings, the round edge surface must face to floating journal bearing. Assemble inner snap ring on compressor side by using snap ring pliers. The gap of snap ring must be downward. When reusing floating journal bearing, be sure the identification mark. Apply lube oil to floating journal bearing and insert it. Be sure the round edge surface faces to floating journal bearing and then assemble it. After the assembly, check axial clearance and confirm that floating journal bearing turns lightly. Assemble floating journal bearing of turbine side as well as compressor side. Check the size and gap shape of seal ring. Assemble seal ring. Measure clearance between seal ring and the groove of turbine shaft. Attach heat shield. Apply lube oil to journals of turbine shaft and insert the shaft from turbine housing side. Be sure the gap of seal ring is upward. Insert turbine shaft completely. Turn the openings of semi-float bearings to inside and install them in bearing house. Make sure the openings of semi-float bearings are surely put in the pins, which are installed in bearing housing. Install snap rings in the direction that the smooth, rounded surface to the semi-float bearing. Turn gap of turbine side snap ring to the left, seen from turbine side, and compressor side snap ring to right, seen from compressor side. Make sure snap rings are firmly seated in bearing housing grooves. Take care to prevent damage to semi-float bearing by using pliers. Make sure the slight movement of semi-float bearings after snap rings are installed. Check the identification mark on thrust collar of turbine side. Apply lube oil and assemble it. Check the oil inlet of thrust bearing and blow air. screw 2 bolts removed from seal plate into thrust bearing. Be sure of the position of knock pin and lube oil inlet on thrust bearing. Apply lube oil and assemble the bearing. Be sure thrust bearing doesn't turn. Be sure surfaces of the housing and the bearing are flat. Apply lube oil to distance piece and insert it. Apply lube oil to thrust collar and assemble it. Apply grease to O-ring and insert it. Assemble the seal ring on sealing bush. Measure clearance between seal ring and the groove of sealing bush. Insert sealing bush into seal plate. When inserting seal bush, the gap of seal ring must be toward the arrow on seal plate. Be sure the arrows on thrust bearing and seal plate are upward, and then assemble seal plate. Tighten bolts. Uncover the turbine shaft end. Apply lube oil to turbine shaft. Hold turbine shaft and insert compressor impeller. Tighten shaft end hexagon nut temporarily. Apply anti-seizure agent to screw thread of bolt of turbine housing. Apply multi-coat to seat of metal seal gasket and assemble it. When assembling bearing housing, do not damage turbine shaft. Assemble bolts and turbine side clamps. To insert some bolts which are interfered by flanges of bearing housing, turn the housing. Align the match marks and tighten bolts. Fix the turbocharger on the work table. Fit up turbine housing with turbine rotor locking tool. Align slits on compressor impeller and turbine shaft end. After that, tighten the shaft end nut by using a torque wrench. As the shaft end nut is left-hand screw, tighten the nut anti-clockwise. Be sure the slits are aligned. After tightening the nut, remove turbine rotor locking tool. Be sure to turn turbine rotor lightly by hand. After assembly, measure clearance between turbine rotor and turbine housing and record the values. Use 2 thickness gauges and measure clearance and record the values. Insert O-ring into compressor housing. Apply grease to the O-ring. Assemble compressor housing. Align match marks. Assemble bolts and turbine side clamps. At this moment, tighten the bolts temporarily. After positioning compressor housing with boost air inlet, fully tighten the bolts. Lift up the turbocharger with wire ropes. Be sure not to damage other parts during lowering the turbocharger. Tighten turbocharger mounting nut temporarily. Apply multi-coat to bolts of exhaust outlet pipe. Tighten mounting bolts temporarily. Apply multi-coat to bolts of exhaust inlet pipe. Insert gasket and tighten mounting bolts temporarily. Insert O-ring of boost air inlet pipe and tighten bolts of boost air inlet flange temporarily. Confirm that exhaust inlet and outlet and boost air inlet are placed on the right position. Tighten bolts of turbocharger completely. Insert gasket and connect cooling water pipe. Insert gasket and connect lube oil pipe. Wrap the connection of lube oil pipes with anti-splash tape. Check movement of turbine rotor by turning it by hand. Check the inside of silencer and assemble it. Operate lube oil priming pump. Circulate cooling water. Cover the turbocharger with heat insulation. Carry out trial run and check for abnormal sound from the turbocharger. Check lube oil pressure, temperature, and so on. If there is any abnormality, stop the engine at once. When cleaning turbine impeller with cleaning agent, do not soak the shaft part into the detergent, and do not touch the shaft with wet hands. It causes the shaft to corrode and to get dense. Before cleaning the impeller, wrap the shaft part with tape. Even small impact cause the bending of compressor impeller fin edges easily, as they are very thin. Even though compressor fins are made with aluminum alloy, do not straighten the bend. If you do so, the bent fin edge is broken easily. In case of small bends, unless there is no abnormal vibration and noise, the turbocharger can be used. Seal ring, snap ring, O-ring, and so on are consumption parts. If these consumption parts aren't replaced, turbocharger may be damaged. Replace all consumption parts on consumption parts list every disassembly. Clean seal ring groove inevitably. In case thrust bearing is assembled in bearing case without fitting knock pin into pinhole on thrust bearing, the thrust bearing is burnt. Measure radial and axial clearance and be sure rotor shaft can be rotated lightly by hand. The measurement and the rotation prevent from misassembly. It's very small clearance between compressor wheel and rotor shaft, so it's hard to remove. Rotate the rotor shaft and heat compressor wheel with a dryer. Then remove compressor wheel. If washing only compressor wheel with water and leave it for a while, the rotor shaft may be rusted and can't be extracted. Shaft end hexagon nut is left-hand screw. If turning the nut anti-clockwise for loosening without noticing left-hand screw, the nut is tightened and it's possible to break rotor shaft. Do not tap the end of rotor shaft with hammer to extract compressor wheel, as threads of the end of the shaft are deformed, and the breakage of the shaft may occur when tightening the nut. Match the match mark on the compressor wheel and notch at the end of rotor shaft, as dynamic balance is adjusted at this position. Exhaust pipes are expanded to turbocharger side because of heat expansion. This expansion causes deformation of turbine casing, and then turbine rotor touches turbine casing and